Welcome to the Pulse Experience, the podcast that takes you on a journey of wellness at the intersection of technology and human experience. I'm your host, Edward Beltran, CEO of Fierce and innovator of Pulse. You know, stress is a very large problem today. It's costing organizations $300 billion annually, not to mention the impact on our people and the individuals in our companies. And often we don't know what's causing our stress. And if we do, we don't know the proper, most impactful way to handle it. Instead, we're used to just accepting stress and managing it at a general level, such as with better diet, better sleep, exercise, or meditation. But this doesn't get underneath the root issues of our stress or eliminate them. And today, there's so much that's required of us at both our homes and the workplace that we don't always have the tools to be able to be self-aware and tackle these stressors. However, our bodies, they don't lie. They tell us constantly what's happening. They're responding to our environments, and it's our job to listen. And when we handle these challenges and take them head on, they drive positive results in both our personal and our professional lives. Pulse is our proprietary app that integrates with wearable devices and infuses cutting-edge science to be able to show you who you're with and where you're at when you're experiencing stress by the hour. Then we wrap context around these events by pulling in calendar and GPS data to be able to further drive that self-awareness. And more importantly, move into action with either a live coach or the in-app AI bot to be able to tackle these stressors, drive your resilience higher, as well as the outcomes you desire in your lives. We call this biometric intelligence. Our certified coaches walk into every coaching session with these same biometric data and insights to be able to help you identify the themes that are going to have the most impact on your lives and tackle those toughest challenges. This transformation is the Pulse Experience. Hello, everyone. I'm Edward Beltran, CEO of Fierce and innovator of Pulse. I'm so excited this week to have Raymond Strom joining us. He's been a public safety officer for over 20 years out of a department in Northern California. And he's been doing us a tremendous amount of work in the space. And he's here to talk to us today about his Pulse experience, as well as his experience of being a public safety officer, as well as training the next generation of public safety officers. Raymond, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ed.
So let's just kick this off. So you're in a very special department, Raymond, so if I understand correctly, that has both police and fire. That's just absolutely amazing. Tell us more about that. How does that work?
So the public safety department is police, fire, and EMT. So we're trained in all three fields. So officers carry their turnouts in their vehicles when they're driving around doing patrol, and they help fill in for the fire guys when there's a fire. So both fire and police work together in conjunction, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense, Raymond. That's absolutely amazing. And I'm sure it's been very fulfilling for you over your amazing career. And I also understand now you have the opportunity to train incoming classes. I'm sure that's very fulfilling as well. Tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to become a fire training officer. So I am tasked with getting new recruits up to speed with the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety's standards, basic firefighting skills, EMT skills, and just overall getting used to the fire side. And it's been a really enjoyable job. Stressful at the same time, but also very enjoyable.
I can imagine. And I also imagine, Raymond, like reflecting back when you were a newbie, a young whippersnapper, right? And putting yourself in that spot and reflecting back, it's always a fun experience, right? And I'm sure you were wishing that you had a trainer just like you at that point in time as well, I'm sure.
And it's funny that you say that. I take my previous experiences from the field training officers that I had throughout the years and try to take little pieces of that and implement that with the new recruits. Some things good, some things bad that I wanted to keep out from my experiences when I was younger to kind of make the transition a lot easier, because the main goal is to teach, right? And to become an effective public safety officer, not stress them out so much where they're not being an effective employee. So.
No, I absolutely love that, Raymond. And you know what you're stating is so true, and it's applicable across the board, right? Like on our side, as far as businesses, that's a huge issue as well, right? This concept of like leadership, right? And you're a leader within your department, and it's the same thing, right? When you're coming up, you see things that you like sometimes and things you don't like, and you try to incorporate and change your style. It's really interesting, right? We reflect upon this all the time. And I got to tell you, I've had a great career. I've had the opportunity to see some amazing leaders and not so amazing leaders, like you're stipulating. And you know what it comes down to as I reflect back now that I'm an old man is it always comes down to like insecurities, right? And how secure you are and self-aware you are as a leader. And I used to think when I was younger that it just came with like age, but the data doesn't show that's not necessarily true, right? The driving force
Absolutely.
always being self-awareness. Who am I? How am I showing up? So Ray, thank you for that tidbit. That's absolutely amazing. Oh, sorry, Jeff, something else you wanted to add on that in your
No, I
reflection?
was just agreeing. You hit the nail on the head with what you were discussing.
Yeah. And so with that, Raymond, you have this amazing experience, right? And I also understand from what you told me and what we heard a few minutes ago is you have a wonderful, beautiful young family, right? So to just imagine the levels of kind of stress and responsibility that you have, I'm sure is very 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 intense. And when you look at the data, it's very interesting because police and fire independently always rank in the top 10, if not the top 5 of stress. Why do you think that is? And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your relationship and how you think about stress.
Both are absolutely correct, are very stressful professions. And I think a lot of that stems from just the nature of the work. Police, for instance, is a very high speed, unpredictable line of work where you are hyper vigilant and always on and worried about your safety. On the flip side, the fire side is also very stressful and unpredictable, but also fires are extremely dangerous. And you also see a lot of things that the average person does not see, from car wrecks to the unfortunate dead bodies, seeing people at their worst, and it can take its toll mentally and physically on you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Raymond, before I take a little bit of a deeper dive on that, um, you mentioned the impacts of kind of the job, if you will, right? And I touched a little bit upon your personal responsibilities and obligations as well. From a personal perspective, what has been your relationship on stress? How have you thought about stress, Raymond? And tell us a little bit about maybe your evolution from learning. I mean, you look like you're 10 years younger than me, but I'm going to presume maybe we're around the same age. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that journey. I mean, I think it's just fascinating, especially in the line of work you're in.
Well, from a very young age, when I first became a police officer in 2005-ish,
You're
around
dating
that time.
yourself. You're dating
I
yourself.
know.
I'm 20 years younger than me. I'm taking that back now.
Well, with that being said, I was luckily and fortunate to have some forward thinking individuals to say, hey, this job's stressful. These are the things you need to do to take care of yourself. One being make sure you exercise and eat right and try to get as much rest as possible. There's a lot of things that you're going to see in this job that are going to prevent you from doing those things successfully, but you have to make sure you make a conscious effort to do that. And one individual, don't want to mention his name per se, but he told me lifetime dedication to fitness. That was his main thing he said to get out of it, because it's going to help you in the long run, the stress and the physical aspects of the job. And that resonated with me throughout the years. And the times where I was dealing with stressful situations, I always knew that staying physically fit was a huge factor in keeping my mental stress at a reasonable and level. And as time went on, I've learned how box breathing, for instance, which is a technique that the Navy SEALs use to relax and to help reduce stress in stressful situations so you can perform at a higher level. So these different things that I've acquired over the years have helped me basically manage the stresses of this particular job.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Raymond. And I can definitely resonate with that. The way I came up was exercise was a great way to just kind of help you with that mental kind of stability and get you in a good spot, right? And even today, even if I have a stressful day, I'll drop and do like 400 push-ups, or I'm out on my bike or running or whatever it happens to be. What I'm finding, the Raymond, which is very interesting, and why we're so passionate about the work that we're doing with our chief behavioral science officer and us as an organization, is that the exercise is fantastic, but I'm finding, especially as we're living in more stressful times, especially as I've taken on more responsibility, it's not enough, right? Like I used to be able
Absolutely.
to see my heart rate go down and I'm in a better place. But now, I'm finding, a lot of more sleepless nights, a lot more worry. I have young children at home as well, Raymond. And so like sometimes it just kind of culminates. And so that's the reason why we're so passionate about the work that we're doing, is to be able to get underneath what those key stressors are that you can control. Some of them you can, and some of them you can't control, right? Which you know. But the ones that you do have a outsized impact on you as a person. And so I want to ask you the next question in your line of work, and something that you had mentioned around the things you see at work, and being able to deal with those from a mental perspective. Some of the work that we're doing with one of our top coaches, Scott Winter, he's done a lot of work with frontline responders and what he calls down regulating after a major event. And so, as you know, there's positive coping and there's also negative coping. So before we dive a little bit into your experience with Pulse, tell us a little bit about that, Raymond, and some of the things that you have done to be cognizant, around making those shifts.
What's become a common practice in our line of work, which I'm actually happy we're evolving towards that, is in the previous generation, it was don't talk about it, suck it up, contain it, and deal with it. Now, when we have situations, we have debriefings. So if there's a high stress situation, we talk about it and get it out right away and don't compartmentalize it and hold it in, because that over time can cause a lot of issues, which we've learned in our line of work. We also have peer groups that call individuals who are on these calls to check on them and make sure that they're doing okay. So these are things that have evolved over my career that I'm happy to see to try to mitigate some of these things, especially the post-stress of some of these high-level events.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And wow, just thinking through the impacts of something as making the shift of just being able to talk about, hey man, like I went through this thing and it was tough, right? Makes a huge difference. We don't deal with the type of things that you and your fellow officers in the department do, Raymond, but the parallels are kind of the same in regards to, when I started my career, it was, you never talked about mental health. You never talked about being stressed out. It wasn't anything that you did. In fact, I had senior mentors say, never let them see you sweat, right? Like that was the mantra, right? That you held it all in. But here's the thing that we know, right? And I'm sure you can relate to this. It's going to come out in one way or another. It's coming out somewhere.
100%.
That's awesome.
And the good thing about identifying some of these things that, like you're saying, if you do hold it in, it can come out in other forms, taking it out on your family, taking it out on other coworkers. I mean, it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that those resources are in place for him. And obviously you're in a great spot and making huge impacts in your organization on that front as well. I have a funny story to share with you before we dive a little bit into Pulse and your journey. So when we were going through our trials, my chief technologist, her name is Geeta. She's actually our VP of technology and infrastructure. She's pouring over data, looking at things. And I was going through my Pulse trials because, as you know, it's continuous. You have your watch on, the data's getting captured, right? And yeah, exactly. And so, the way I came up, Raymond, was, long week, put your work in, made sure your family's good. And then, Friday comes along and, those Heinekens are nice and cold and, you're pulling a couple off the shelf and stuff like that. So I'm sitting on my couch, just relaxing, just trying to unwind. I think I was watching, ESPN, one of the 30 for 30s or something like that. All of a sudden I'm getting blown up by Geeta. And I'm like, Geeta, what's going on? Right? Like, what's the emergency? She goes, oh, I'm worried about you. I'm worried about you because, your data's off the charts. And I'm like, the data's off the charts. I'm like sitting down, drinking a beer, watching 30 for 30. Like Tom Brady, my favorite player. And I know you're probably going to have some pushback on that, Raymond. I guess
it's true.
But
Go Niners.
well, we'll get into that later. So, I'm sitting back and then, she goes, no, your data's all over the place. So I said, all right, let me take a look. Right. So I look and she's absolutely right. And it's interesting because, you hear about this, but you don't really realize it, especially if you're used to, something that, drink a couple beers on the weekend. And she was right. Like my body was actually showing I was going into some type of shock. My HRV was actually going down. Right. And I was just amazed because my association had always been, drink a couple beers, take the edge off. It's a weekend. You deserved it. But my body was actually going into some type of shock. So I had to step back and just make the recognition that this is a learned behavior that doesn't necessarily have its desired results. So it was very
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I grasped from the app, and maybe I'm not moving too far ahead, noticing that there was those, when I thought, okay, why does it say I'm stressed out right now? I'm just making eggs. My kids aren't around. There isn't any other stimuli to kind of, necessitate that. And I'm like, that's weird. So by diving deeper into the Pulse app and having some of the coaching sessions with Joe Parent, it helped me identify some other things that I didn't realize were going on in my life that were stressing me out. Even at times of the night that I didn't think would even be possible to be stressed out. For instance, 1 or 2 in the morning when I'm obviously sleeping, and I'm like, what is going on at that time period to make me, those levels to go up? So it was a very interesting helping me dive into the true cause of my stress. And it's not so simple as, I'll work out or do this. And like you said, maybe enjoy a beverage or libation and relax, and that should be fine. Because I found similar things to you, Ed, was sitting there doing essentially nothing, and then my numbers are spiking. And I'm like, wow, this is something else is going on here. So it's, you're absolutely correct when it comes to that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's a great segue, Raymond. So, I know when we looked at your data after you'd gone through the coaching intervention, we saw some pretty significant drops, around 25%. And from what you're describing, those stress spikes came out almost on nuanced everyday events. And one of the things we talk a lot about is misplaced stress. And that's like a big deal because, cooking eggs, obviously that's not like the worst of the places to have misplaced stress come
Absolutely.
out. But what we see where a lot of times misplaced stress come out in areas or times that you don't want them to, right? And your reaction to your environment isn't necessarily as positive as you would like, or the impact. So let's talk a little bit more about those events that you're talking about, Raymond, and the self-awareness behind it. Like, what was it that you uncovered from a personal perspective to say, hey, here's what's really going on, or I need to make some shifts?
Yeah. And I realized that maybe I was holding on to things prior to me, like going to sleep, thinking about the next day. And in my sleep, it was even causing these spikes. And it highlighted some things that I was actually stressed out at times when I didn't think I would be stressed. It made me self-aware in the fact that there's other things in my life besides work that can cause some of these stresses. And seemingly meaningless tasks my mind is somewhere else and causing my body to react to it. So what I've tried to do, what it's made me do, is kind of think about it a lot more and try to find ways to either, okay, you know what, let's take a deep breath, or look at things a little bit differently to try to, stop myself from potentially being stressed out, or utilizing some of the tools inside the app that help me, hey, I'm at a 4 right now, so let's use some of these tools that are within the app to kind of help mitigate that and figure out what's going on. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And the data is even more interesting. The data out there stipulates that 95% of people think they're self-aware, but 10 to 50% really are. And as you and I touched upon, Raymond, with the way we might have grown up, or the way we might have been trained early in our careers, the reality is that we've been trained to put our mind somewhere else. We've been trained to accept aggregate stress, and we're trying to decouple that and pull that back. But we've been doing this for years, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think the best thing about this app is helping you recognize those things. I thought I had the key to being stress-free. Oh, I exercise, I eat right, I try to drink a lot of water. But one thing I did recognize that probably does contribute to some of the stressors is the lack of sleep. And I'm not sure if you get a full 8 hours of sleep every night, but that is it's very hard. And I found that probably is contributing to some of these things as well. So during my coaching, we discussed, okay, like, what can you try to do to make sure that you get more sleep, which we know proven helps you stress, it helps level out your stress. It can help you in all facets of your life. Sleep is very important. So I was just making a conscious effort to try to go to bed at a certain time and wake up at a certain time, and make sure if I did feel like, even subconsciously or consciously, that I may be getting stressed out, to try to use some of the tools in the app to kind of help me. Oh, I think this is one of those moments where I may be getting to that 3-4 level. So let's try to use some of these tools to try to mitigate that. And just being very self-aware of those micro stressors that I had no idea were going on in my life. So it's a really good indicator of that there's other things going on in your life that could be causing these things, versus the very easy to pick out work, family, or things of those nature. So,
no, I love that, Raymond. And I do want to touch upon sleep because I do think that's important. I struggle with sleep myself. with a lot of the pressures that I have upon myself. One thing I want to share with you, Raymond, we talked about this, and I know Joe's talked about this and what Fierce has been doing for over 20 years with, Fortune 500 companies or emerging startups. At the end of the day, what happens is that we have millions of interactions, right? Be it with peers, be it with superiors, be it with family. And, there's always misunderstandings, right? We're humans. It's just, we're not computers, right? We're people
Yeah.
trying to get the jobs done and, make sure our families are in a good spot. And these misunderstandings or areas that need to be clarified happen all the time, right? And as individuals, we have the opportunity to walk away from a situation and say, that's okay, right? That's not a big deal. But our bodies don't lie. They harbor the stress, they harbor the worry, they harbor the concern, they harbor the anger, any feeling that you can go through, it's there, right? What we find in organizations, Raymond, which I'm sure is probably very apparent in public services as well, is you walk away from a situation, someone says something to you that you didn't understand or was offensive, and you go and tell 3 other people, it actually amplifies stress. And what we find in our research is that 90% of the time it's a misunderstanding. People aren't self-aware, right? Like, I'm Mexican, I'm a 6'1", 6'2", if I'm really standing up straight, right? But I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, "Are you really Mexican?" Oh, come on, right? Something like that, right? And the implication being that Mexicans are short and speak with an accent, or I don't even know. You know what I mean? And it's those situations where when I was younger, I did have a feeling about it, but now as a more kind of mature adult, I hope, right? It's this is an opportunity to engage in a conversation of understanding, right? Person's not self-aware;
Absolutely.
they feel like they might be connected with me on a personal level. But if I just harbor that or I walk away telling my own story, it doesn't do me any good because I've already harbored that stress and that concern and that worry and maybe told some other people. It doesn't go away, right?
No.
And I know there was a story, Raymond, that you told me that happened to you not too long ago, as well as some other interactions like these. And I think you were in a similar boat in how you handle these situations. Specifically, you told me about how you got into a taxi the other day, and I'm wondering why your Uber didn't work, but that's a whole other story. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that situation?
It's kind of a long story, but the Ubers were taking forever, and they actually had a taxi that was available right away. So I kind of went back in
I
time
knew there was
and
a
got inside
reason.
the taxi.
I knew that was a logical reason. All right.
But to make a long story short, this individual, I'm sure, is a hardworking individual and probably sees things that, even as in my line of work, probably don't see on an everyday basis, and has to deal with a myriad of people, different types of personalities. So we got into the taxi. I told him where I was going, and he wanted me to pay him up front, which, as we know, isn't common practice for taxi cabs. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why would you want me to do that? And he said, oh, just pay up front. And not to judge him as a person, I think from some of his experiences in the past, he's probably had some negative outcomes from maybe individuals who look like me, or maybe not, maybe just the time of night. Who knows? He didn't indicate anything that would make it specific to race, but I can kind of deduce what he was getting at. So I said, hey, sir, I'm going to give you this money because I understand you're probably a good man and you don't want to get burned. He's probably happened a million times, but I just want to let you know I'm not one of those individuals. And I can tell once I told him that, and I didn't react angrily, he felt horrible. I can tell. I can see it. It took him a second because he had a lot of pride, but I gave him the money and I said, well, that's not right. And I understand where you're coming from and I'm not upset with you, but I wanted to take that opportunity to make it a learning situation for him that, hey, not everyone acts that way. So even though it's a gamble, you should probably try to treat people the same instead of, making people pay up front and for whatever reasons that you had. And at the end, once we got to the end of the ride, I shook his hand and he apologized and he said, thank you for giving me that perspective. And it was nice. It was a teachable moment. And I'm glad I reacted that way versus yelling at him and in other words, acting foolish based on this guy's, preconceived stereotypes. And I know he's just a hardworking guy trying to make a living. He that money is his livelihood. So I knew where he was coming from, maybe a little bit of a, displaced way of looking at things, but I think overall he learned a valuable lesson, and it helped me too. I learned a valuable lesson that, hey, this is a situation I can be in, and explain to a person how this makes people feel versus yelling and screaming at them, pulling out my phone, getting on social media and making a big stink out of it, claiming this taxi driver is a racist. What do we all get out of it? Nothing. So him and I talking like men and let him know how I feel. And he apologized at the end. And I think we move forward versus having another negative interaction. So.
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting situation, Raymond. And I think it's just a powerful example. First, my hat off to you for having that maturity and self-awareness to be able to go through that. Because at the end of the day, right, you had an objective in mind. You had to go from, to wherever your location was. He had his objective, which was he's on the hook for the fare, right? And so you both met your mutual objectives, right? But it could have went in many different directions had you not been self-aware of your own presence and thought through the situation and how you can make this a positive on both sides, right? You didn't shy away from
Absolutely.
it. You cleared your context, which is what we teach, and you engaged in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And
amazing.
it was a good experience, even though at first I was like a little taken aback. I'm like, that's interesting. But like I said, it all worked itself out. And I think at the end, we both learned something, and ended up being a positive experience in the end.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. I feel like I can continue talking to you for days. It's almost like, you know what I mean? I've known you for a very long time or something like that.
It's crazy, man. Like you're my brother or something.
We're probably gonna have to have you back, man, because I know that you're very passionate about Pulse and Power that it does, but as well as continuing to be progressive in police departments and fire departments. I want to share with you a story that happened to me recently, Raymond, that goes along the same lines of what you just experienced that I think is very relevant. But it's really interesting. So my two young sons are in late elementary and one's going into junior high, so they have like parent teacher nights. So I went to the parent teacher academic night the other night, and I was lost, man. It was like one of those schools where there's corridors everywhere, and even though I'm looking at a map, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so there was a gentleman who was kind of coordinating traffic, if you will, and I talked to him, and it was a good interaction. It wasn't like negative. It was like, oh, here's where you go, right? And then I saw him, the same gentleman, I saw him later on, maybe 30 or 45 minutes later upstairs. And he comes up to me like smiling and all happy, where before he was more kind of like just focused and stoic, which is fine. And he goes, you're Jose, right? You're Jose. Like I know you. And I'm like, no, my name's Ed. And he goes, oh, well, you must look like a Jose. And I'm just like, okay. But I'm in this moment and I'm like, and it turns out he's the principal of the school. So, but I didn't know it at the time. But here's the thing: in that moment, though, I wasn't there like for me, right? I was there for my guy, right? And so, just like in sports, and Raymond, you look like an athlete. You're in the moment, and you don't have time to think. You're focused on the execution, right? You have a goal, an objective, right? And so, how do you get to that objective from an organization perspective, from a public safety perspective? Because that's most important in the moment, right? And so it was interesting because I looked at my data and I actually didn't score a high stress level in the moment at all because I was so focused on the objective. I got to get to the class. I got to meet, my guy's teacher and make sure that I have a positive presence and understand what's going on. But later on, when I was kind of talking about the situation, that's when the force hit, right? So it was a really interesting situation, Raymond, and one that I might probably have to address, but timing's everything as well. And what you said in your situation, to clear my context, maybe he did meet a guy named Jose that looked just like me, that was a Mexican, that was almost 6'2". I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's true.
We will see. Okay. I wanted to talk about one more situation. Our Chief Behavioral Science Officer, Gabe Della Rosa, he's done some amazing work with people in the Navy's Naval Center for Combat and Operational Control for well over 10 years. And he's just been done amazing work around just resilience and performance optimization. And the work that we're doing now with public safety officers, I love the way he describes it. The way he describes it is this for lay people like me. He goes, if you sprint 4 miles, you're going to be tired, right? I'm like, yes. So imagine if you're a firefighter and you get a call that's high risk, right? Either fire, you got to save people. Or are you going to be at your physical best? Like, no. And he's like, yeah, I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. You won't be. So your propensity for error or mistakes, if you will, go higher because you're not at your physical best. And And then he flips it on its head and he says, it's the same thing with mental acuity or stress. If you have a lot of stress going on in your personal lives and right before you go on the job, and maybe even on your job, there's some politics or other issues occurring, why are you going to be at your best? The answer is no. And so he says the same thing is true with your mental acuity. When you walk into these situations that are high risk and you have to make split level decisions, that's when you see the propensity for error. So how do we help support and make sure that the stress levels are lower around or before these high risk events? So Raymond, I know you and I talked a little bit about this, but tell us about how that resonates for you.
So that's a very good point, what Dr. De La Rosa was talking about, because when I do notice when you are stressed out at home and when you're stressed out in your own personal aspects of your life, how your work performance can take a dump. Lack of sleep, kids, wife, finances, things of that nature, coupled with the stresses of the job, can definitely throw you off your game. And I think the one thing that this app is discussing or helping me realize is that identifying those stressors and trying to fix those things prior to them getting to a bigger scenario will help you with your everyday jobs, especially stressful jobs like police and fire. So this app has helped me really realize that there's a lot of things going on that could potentially be affecting my work unintentionally. How can I be the best fireman or best police officer I can be? And by identifying some of these issues and recognizing it and being self-aware, I can make sure that I'm being the best that I can be in that line of work. Because let's be honest, when you don't want to stressed out, washed up police officer or firefighter showing up to your house or showing up in a situation when you're having the worst day of your life. You want a person who is dialed, can deal with their emotions, can handle their stress, and is able to recognize that stress so it doesn't affect their daily life. And as we've seen, officers who are overstressed or firefighters who are overstressed usually do other things that negatively affect their jobs, making bad decisions on duty, making mistakes on duty, things that could negatively affect other people's lives. So I think it's awesome that Dr. De La Rosa has recognized some of these things and segueing that into the professions that he's dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Raymond. And it's very clear that you're self-aware and you're committed to continuous improvement as well as the impact that you can make with your fellow officers. So appreciate you being a thought leader in this space. We're definitely going to have you back on with some of the work that we're doing with Scott Winter. A couple of things that I just want to share with you before we depart. One is, we didn't have the opportunity to explore a lot of different areas that you brought up that I think are important, but you also bring up finances, right? And for everybody right now is a tough time, right? Number one. Number two is you mentioned you're in the Bay Area, which I think is like one of the most expensive places on earth. It's probably even more expensive than land on the moon at this point, right? And so, I saw an interesting statistic. I'll probably have to quote it more accurately in the future, but some large percentage of people are commuting in that have a commute one way of, I think it's like was an hour and a half, 2 hours or something crazy like that. And I was like, that is like,
Absolutely.
imagine this on individuals having to commute like that.
We have some guys who some live in different states, and others live up to 90 miles away from work. And that's 90 miles each way. And some of them are coming in every day because they can't afford to live in the Bay Area. So they have to move further out. And can you imagine the impact of stress? I happen to live somewhat closer and, still a little bit of a commute, but not nearly as much as 90 miles. So I can only imagine what kind of stresses that adds. So
just thinking through that, my stress level spiked. Raymond, always a real pleasure to talk with you. I always enjoyed our conversations prior to this and, your involvement with Pulse. Two statistics I want to leave and then we'll depart and have you on again is Scott Winter is going to come on and share with us some of these stats as well. There's a lot of reports of commanders talking about what's happening in their workforce, right? So commanders who run, public service departments around there being a lot of absences due to stress, but also to the compounding impact it's having on the department at large, because with folks out for stress and other issues, traumatic stress, regular stress, it's having a compounding issue on everyone else in their department. to having to pick up the slack, right? Required overtime, so on and so forth. So this is a real issue, and Scott will share more data around that, as well as the fact that there's research showing that lower HRV, so essentially being more stressed, also impacts response time.
Mhm.
So very incredible statistics. We're going to explore those a little bit more. So Raymond, again, really appreciate you being on. Can't thank you enough for your time.
So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It was very fun. I look forward to being here again.